All right, so this adoption credit, this is a very generous credit. This is if you adopt children, you can get a credit. Probably the most complicated part of the adoption credit one is the timing of it. When you get to take the credit, because it depends on the type of adoption it is when you get to take it. That can make a difference as far as when you get to take the credit. It's a very generous credit. 100% of qualified adoption expenses paid up to a maximum of $14,890 per eligible child. Per eligible child that is adopted. Married taxpayers have to file jointly in order to take it. So that would be another one of those areas where if you're filing separately, that would be a disadvantage. Qualified adoption expenses would include reasonable and necessary expenses such as adoption fees, court costs, attorney fees, similar expenses directly related to the legal adoption of an eligible child. They do not include any reimbursements under an employer program. There are certain employers that will help to offset the costs of adoption. An eligible child is one who's under the age of 18 or is incapable of caring for themselves, but does not include a child of an individual's spouse. So you can't, we're talking about like a second marriage and they've got children, so you can't adopt your stepchildren in that case, yeah. Adoption proceedings oftentimes, as they say, are protracted, they take a long time. Taxpayers often pay expenses in a tax year other than the year in which the adoption becomes final. So you start the process, it might take a year or 2 or 3 for it to become final. So for expenses that were paid in the years before the adoption becomes final, taxpayers will take the credit in the year immediately after it is paid. So you don't get to take it in the year that it's paid, you get to take it in the next year, okay? For expenses paid in the year the adoption is final, or expenses paid after that time, they would take the credit in the year that it's paid. Okay? So total amount of qualified adoption expenses over all the years cannot exceed $14,890. So here's an example. Mila and Layla legally adopted a child in 2022. They incurred and paid qualified expenses of $6,000 in 2021, $4,000 in 2022, and $5,000 in 2023. Okay, it was finalized in 2022. They're not going to be able to take these in 2021. It has to be the year after. Without any AGI limitations, they're entitled to an adoption credit of $10,000 in 2022. So these have to be paid, have to be credited in the next year. Okay, but because the adoption was final in 2022, they also get to add this $4,000 to it. And an additional $4,890 in 2023. It's not $5,000 because they're limited to the $14,890. 6 plus 4 plus 5 is $15,000. They're over the credit limit. Okay. If a taxpayer adopts a child who's not a citizen or a resident of the U.S., credit is allowed only in the year in which the adoption becomes final or in a later year if the expenses are paid or incurred in a later year. So foreign adoptions are treated a little bit differently as far as the timing of being allowed to take that credit, but you still get the credit, okay? So in this one, let's see, well, it would be the same in this case because that $6,000 would be taken in 2022 because that's the year that it became final. But if it wasn't final until 2023, then they'd have to wait until 2023 to take all of this credit. Special needs children have special rules as well. So special needs child is usually, it's determined by the state if they're a special needs child. And we're talking about children who are more difficult to adopt. So those children who maybe are older, have special physical or mental handicaps that make it more difficult for them to adopt. So, that's, I guess they meant that. Such a child has to be a U.S. citizen or resident. So it's not, it doesn't, the special conditions for the special needs child does not qualify for foreign adoptions. They would still get the adoption credit, but the rules regarding the adoption credit would be applied for foreign adoptions. Does that make sense? Because there are, for a special needs child, you get to take $14,890 credit regardless of whether they had the expenses. Even if they didn't have any expenses. And oftentimes with a special needs child, there really aren't expenses that are involved because the state helps to, depending upon the situation, the situation with the child, if they've been like in foster care or in, have been in the state system, oftentimes there aren't really any fees associated with that. But they get a $14,890 credit regardless of whether they incurred any qualifying expenses. The other ones are limited to the number, it's limited to the amount of expenses that were incurred. They take it in the year that the adoption becomes final. Okay. Now there is a phase out for this. Again, modified AGI, which AGI plus income earned abroad. Phase out begins when AGI reaches 223,410 and is completely phased out when modified AGI reaches 263,410. Let's see. Oh, this is the retirement savings contributions. So there's all the percentages there. Adoption credit uses form 8839. So here's the calculation for the AGI. 263,410 minus modified AGI divided by 40,000. Okay. And then we multiply that by the amount of the credit that they would be eligible for. So if they were eligible for the full amount, we multiply that by $14,890. If they spent $10,000 in expenses, and that would be the credit, we'd multiply that by $10,000. Okay, here's an example. Nicholas and Elaine spent $18,000 in qualified adoption expenses. Their modified AGI is $235,000. So we take the $263,410 minus, did we say $235,000? Divide that by 40,000, which is, didn't really give us the result there. But this, they would be eligible for the full credit because they spent 18,000, right? And then we're gonna multiply that by the 14,890 here, which, 10,577 is what they get for us. If the taxpayer receives employer-provided adoption benefits, those benefits will be subtracted from the credit. So it's limited to the amount paid or incurred in excess of the employer-provided assistance. So what we want to do first is, so if they had received, say, $5,000 worth of assistance, we would subtract 5,000 from this. So 9,890. We'd use 9,890 times that, and the credit would be a different amount. Does that make sense? Because they got some reimbursement for that. Let's see this. Levi and Isaiah incurred the following expenses in the adoption of their infant daughter, which was finalized in 2022. So in 2021, they spent $10,800. 2022, they spent $3,950. Their modified AGI is 120, so it's well under that 263. How much can they claim in 2021? It's not a special needs. You may know? What can they claim in 2021?
10,800.
Zero. Yeah, that's all right. Because they have to wait until the next year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. they're gonna have to wait until the next year. So, how much can they claim in 2021? Nothing. In 2022, they get to claim, so we don't have to do this calculation because they're well under the 263. They can claim whatever the sum of that is, 14,000, well, 14, is that over 50, no, $14,750. Yeah, they'd be able to claim all that. And it's not over the 14,890. Zhang and Umiko spent $16,000 in qualified adoption expenses. Adoption was finalized, all the expenses were incurred in the current year. Their modified AGI is 236. We would have to do this. But the most that we can do is 14,890. How much is their adoption credit? So it's gonna be that. Well, no, it's not gonna be this because that was 235. I don't know how much this is. That would be the calculation. Anybody wants to? Anybody? You would?
It's 10,203.37
And how much?
and 37 cents.
10,203. All right. So that would be their credit. Any other any questions on their adoption credit?